back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a review about a book that I was really excited to talk about, mostly because it's a really anticipated release this year. I know a lot of people wanted to read it, but also because this book is like a chunker. It is not a small book, and I feel like sometimes going into like these really big books, you want to know if it's for you, if it's not for you, because big tomes definitely take up a lot of your time, and if it's not really a book that's meant for you, then it's good not to have to pay for it or jump into it and then have to DNF it halfway through. And so that's another reason why I wanted to talk about this book specifically. Plus, I read it like the second it came out because I was really excited about it, and it took me a very long time. I think it took me like a month to read this entire book. And that is Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. I'm going to talk about it today with you guys and let you know what my thoughts are on it, and I think I have a little bit of an unpopular opinion on it compared to a lot of the videos that I've seen on it. So I think that this is going to be good for those of you who have similar taste to me and want to know if this is for you. So if you guys don't know what this book is about, it's basically about vampires, and the vampires are trying to take over the world and basically become like the empire of the vampire, basically. And there's a small group of people, specific type of people, that can actually fight the vampires off, but it's a very small group of people. And these people basically take it upon themselves to fight off the vampires and keep them from taking over the world, basically. And that's the plot. That's literally the plot. So let's talk about star rating first. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. Most of the people that I follow on Goodreads gave this book 5 stars, and they were raving about it, saying how amazing it was and a masterpiece and all that kind of thing. And I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of what they said, but I don't know if it was just me and my taste in books that made me kind of feel a little bit differently about it. So I'm going to kind of start with why I think this book didn't do it for me fully, why I didn't give this book 5 stars, because I think that some of you guys might feel the same. So if you guys are heavy romance readers, and you really love to have romance in your books, even if it's just a little bit of romance, then you may not love this because there isn't a ton of romance in it. There are elements to this book that does have romance in it, but it's definitely not driven by romance. This book does not have like this really romantic plot line pushing it forward at all, and it is definitely not about the romance. There is romance, but it's just not a key element to it. I love romance in books, and I love romance for a variety of reasons, but one reason why I love romance in books is because I feel like romance sometimes really does push character development for me personally. I tend to feel more attached to characters if I see them interacting with a love interest, and I'm not really sure why that is. I get more attached to the characters because I feel like I can understand them better to a certain degree, and there's this element of vulnerability in romance. A lot of times, especially when you're dealing with really rough, hard characters that are kind of rough around the edges, there's this element of vulnerability that comes along with romance, and I think that that's why it always works really well for me. And I did notice that when there were those little tiny parts of romance in this book, it really did make me feel so much more for the characters. There just wasn't very much of it. And so because of that reason, and the reason why I love romance, it just didn't work for me because there was a lot of times that I just didn't feel fully connected to these characters. I wanted more from them. I wanted to understand them more. Obviously though, there's a lot of people that don't like romance. They don't need romance. And so if you're one of those people that don't like romance heavy stories, then this is probably for you, and you'll probably really like this because it is not romance heavy. Another reason I think I didn't love this story personally, again, this is a total like personal preference type of thing. It has one of my least favorite tropes in it. And I talked about this in like random things that I hate in books video, or very specific things I hate in books, and it is the travel plotline, or like the travel trope, where they're doing a lot of traveling to like get to a destination or to like finish something off that they're planning to do. They have to travel to get there, and they have like little tasks maybe that they have to do on the way there. This book is very heavy in travel. So if you're like me and you don't like that element, just know that it is full of travel, and I do not like it. I find it super boring and super tedious. And because there are vampires in this book, there's a lot of like fight scenes with vampires, and this is another thing that I don't like in books. And I never actually talked about this in, you know, tropes I hate in books or whatever, because I read another book like this recently that had this exact same issue in it, and I realized after reading this one and that other one that it's just not something that I like. And it is repetitive fight scenes. So like if there's a specific character, right, like vampires or zombies or aliens or something like that. And the main characters are constantly having like very similar fight scenes with those creatures over and over and over again. I find that to be extremely tedious and extremely boring. If you're somebody that loves fight scenes, you love like those really action-packed fight scene type things, then you'll love this because there's a lot of them. But I always find that during these types of books where there's like travel, fight scene with a vampire, travel, fight scene with a vampire, travel, fight scene with a vampire, like I just get really bored because I kind of just feel like it's repetitive and it's just not something that I really like. I'm not a huge war book person, so if I'm reading a fantasy book that has a lot of war in it, not my favorite thing. A lot of fighting, not my favorite thing. So for those of you who struggle with that type of thing, this also may not be for you because it does have a lot of travel and fighting, and for me, it just became repetitive. I felt like this book, okay, so this book is like, how long is it? It's a long book. This is a chunker of a book, and the text is really small. It's not a light read at all. And to be honest, I kind of felt like the plot was too simple for what the length of this book was, because when I say it's about vampires trying to take over the world and then a small group of people like trying to fight them off so they won't take over the world, that is literally the plot line. There's no real like other plot line. There's not a lot woven into this to make it different and unique and like lots of plot twists and stuff like that. It's just a very, very, very simple plot line, and I was kind of waiting for like something big to happen, like something cool or something I wasn't expecting to happen, but there's really not a lot of twists in this. Like, you know what the plot line is, and then that is what it is, and then that is it. And it's very heavily focused on Gabriel, the main character, and his entire life story and kind of like how he got to be where he is, and he's talking to a vampire that's like a historian, and he's writing a book about Gabriel, and Gabriel's telling him his story basically, and it's his entire life story. And it's just, I didn't find it to be overly exciting, to be honest. Nothing in this book really blew my socks off. Is that the right phrase? Blew my socks off? Knocked my socks off. For a book like this, and kind of how everyone expected this to be like this new, like profound tome, it didn't really feel profound to me. It was very simple, it was very basic, and it's something that we've seen kind of done before to a certain degree. The world building though in it is really, really great. He took so much time to create a world, create a whole new religion. It was a very dark, like ominous type of feel, and I felt like this world is so easy to picture and kind of like immerse yourself in, which I really love. Like, I love books that just make you feel like you're in like this certain world and you can just picture it so clearly. I felt like he did a really good job with that. And the characters I thought were unique and they were fun to learn about, but I just never felt fully attached to the characters for some reason. Like, if a character were to die or something, like I never really felt overly sad about it. And I don't know why I couldn't make those connections to certain characters, but I just didn't really feel that strongly for any character specifically. And I don't know if it was because Gabriel didn't make very strong like emotional connections with people, or if the characters just weren't explained well enough for me, or maybe, I'm not really sure. The one thing about this book that I really, 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 really loved was the illustrations. So this book has illustrations in it, and I need this in literally every fantasy book I read. Every fantasy book needs to have illustrations in it. I know it's expensive for the authors and for like the publishers, but it completely changes the reading experience. And like, sometimes I feel like I have a hard time like picturing characters in my head. This book was so easy to like picture the characters and create the characters in my mind because they're literally drawn out for you, so you know what they look like and you don't have to guess with it and stuff like that, which I really liked. 2/3 of the way through this book, I had to switch to audio because I just couldn't, for some reason, read this book physically. And I don't know if it was like his writing style or what, but I just don't know if I would have finished it if I wouldn't have listened to the audiobook or switched over to the audiobook. Sometimes I feel like when I'm reading fantasy books that have really flowery writing to it, sometimes I feel like I have a hard time like reading it. Like, I feel like I like can't focus. Like, I'm so focused on trying to read like these weirdly constructed sentences. And sometimes I feel like reading physically is more like mental work than I want at the time. And I feel like this book, for some reason, felt like mental work for me. You guys have to know what I'm talking about. Like, certain fantasy books sometimes feel more like mental work than reading something else. And this book definitely made me feel like I was really working through the text. And so I felt like listening to it really helped me to kind of immerse myself into the story and not focus so much on the reading part and focus more on like just the enjoyment of the story that was being told, if that makes sense. Maybe switching from like audio to physical every once in a while, you may enjoy this book more. And I think if I read the second book, I think I'm gonna do the audio version of the second book, just because I feel like I enjoyed it more like using the audiobook for some reason. So that's definitely something to think about if you do start this and you're just kind of like, I'm not really sure. Switch to the audio and I think you might feel a little bit differently. One thing I can also say too is I loved the beginning of this book. The beginning of this book was great. Like I read the very first page of this book and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like I can already tell that I'm gonna love it. I think it's the prologue, and the whole beginning part of his childhood and like all of this other stuff was so fascinating to me. I was like, oh my gosh, like I am loving this. But I have to say it does get extremely drawn out, and I kind of feel like there were certain parts of this where you could really just take chunks out of this book and the plot would remain the same. It's kind of that type of book where you're like, okay, like I didn't need to read that entire part. Like that literally could have been taken out and I could have still understood the story. You know what I'm saying? So this book did need to be edited down, in my opinion. It was unnecessarily long, and I say that about long books often, but this one really felt like that to me, where it was unnecessarily long. I'm not a tome person usually. I'm not a big book person. Like I've talked about this before, but I have a pretty short attention span, and big books aren't my favorite thing to read. I like them. Like I love A Court of Thorns and Roses. Like there's definitely big books that I really enjoy, but I tend to get bored really easily, and I feel like a lot of times big books are really drawn out because the author's trying to create like this huge world and like this big tome and all this kind of stuff, and I kind of feel like they're trying so hard to make the book big that they actually lose what they're doing, which is telling a story and like continuing a plot forward. And I kind of feel like this book fell into that trap a little bit. I'm not going to say that this book is bad though. Like I still gave it 3 stars. 3 stars for me means this book wasn't anything like amazing, but it also wasn't bad either. Like I still am glad that I read it, but I don't think I would have like missed out much if I wouldn't have read it. But I'm still glad that I read it. It's like that right in the middle mark, and there was definitely parts in this book that I really liked, and I was so engrossed in. And then there's other parts in this book where I was like, oh my god, this is so boring, like this just like needs to pick up like really bad. Like there were times in this book where I was like, this is a 2-star book, and then there was other times in this book where I was like, this is a 4-star book. So it totally kind of depended on where I was at in the book, on whether I liked it and whether I didn't like it. So that's kind of why I settled at 3 stars. I would say overall, this isn't my favorite book in the world. And I'm still debating on whether I want to read the second book. I don't know if I will or not. It's one of those things where it's like when it comes out, I may just never get around to picking it up. And I kind of feel like that might be the case because this just wasn't a book that really held my attention all the time. And if I do, it'll probably be audio, like I said. So I think it's for just a certain group of people. And then there's that small subgroup like me who are just kind of like, it was okay. You know what I mean? Like I get it. I get the 5-star ratings, but it's just not 5 stars for me personally. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I know that there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about with this book. There's a lot of like really in-depth things that I could like go into, but like I said, I didn't want to spoil this. I wanted to make this unspoilery. Comment down below if you guys have any questions about it. If you guys are like, does it have this in it or does it have that in it? It's very violent, by the way. This is an adult novel and it's extremely violent. So there's going to be a lot of dark subjects in it. So definitely if you are a sensitive reader, look up the trigger warnings. But so that is it, guys. Comment down below if you guys have any questions, and I think that's it. So I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.